Welcome to Love for the Truth Radio, a program devoted to encouraging you to be a contender of the faith in an ever-changing church culture. On Love for the Truth Radio, we will discuss current issues and challenging views along with biblical truth that can affect our Christian worldview and how we live out our faith. And now, here's your host, Cindy Hartline.
Welcome to the program. You know, there seems to be a lot of warnings on the internet about a soon economical collapse in the U.S. However, not many people are talking about it on the news, nor are churches addressing it. Well, our guest today to discuss the hows and whys of the imminent economical collapse is Patrick Wood. Patrick is the chief editor of the August Forecast and the August Review. The August Forecast provides info by analyzing trends that relate to markets, economics, politics, and finance. And the August Review is a historical review of the global elitism, its players, and policies. Pat is also a global expert on the subject of technocracy and the author of Technocracy, Rising the Trojan Horse of Global Transformation. Patrick Wood, welcome to Love for the Truth Radio. You know, it's always a pleasure to have you with us today, and I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Great to be back. I am looking forward to it as well.
You know, Pat, in your recent article on the August Review, you told us to get ready for the debt implosion and that global debts are unsustainable. Most of us in the U.S. are familiar with what happened during the last financial meltdown in the early 2007, I think it was, to ending in March 2009. The interest rates were low. People were given easy loans for mortgages that in reality they could not afford based on their income. And as a result, many people lost their homes to foreclosure. The stock market dropped. And, you know, on a small scale, we got a glimpse of what could happen with a U.S. debt implosion. And you said the banks and the governments should have learned from that huge lesson. My big question is this: are we headed in the same direction?
It would appear that we are. And although there was a lot of talk about regulation for the banks and for monetary practices, a lot of the banks, actually a lot of big banks, got fined quite a few millions of dollars for bad practices on foreclosing on people's loans and so on. But there was a lot of talk about financial reform and how they were all going to be, you know, forced back into compliance, into sound banking practices, that everything would be okay and this would not happen again. Mm-hmm. Well, not only did that not happen, but other loopholes have been discovered by the banksters, as I sometimes call them, and they have managed to leverage debt up to new record levels, well exceeding the 2007 level, and we are in a more dangerous position today than we've ever been in the last 25, 30 years. Yep. So unfortunately, nothing has been learned. The American public is more at risk today than they've ever been probably in modern history. Mm-hmm.
Well, you know,
so, yes.
What's really interesting, and I just learned, is that, you know, you're saying we're trying to leverage debt, or we're more in debt, more at risk than ever before, which I heard that we have to keep debt in order to continue. But I guess the thing is then we are continuing as business as usual. We haven't taken the considerations that you had mentioned before. So we haven't learned from our mistake. And so now the result is what? What's going to happen? What's going on right now?
Well, the level of debt in the United States alone has increased. We're about some 17% higher today than we were in 2007. Mm-hmm. The mix of debt is different, however. While before the real estate market had gotten way out of hand, the real estate market doesn't have those problems today that it had back. Still has problems, mind you, but it's not those problems. The debt's been spread around to other areas that you might not expect. It's been spread to Wall Street, for instance, and so a lot of the money that was put out by our Federal Reserve for the sake of quantitative easing ended up as liquidity, if you will, in the stock market, driving stock prices up over this period of time. Other sections of money, segments of that money got into student financing. And paying or creating loans for students to go to college. Who can afford to just pay for it outright anymore? Anyway, the prices are going up and up and up. But student debt has become a huge problem in this whole mix. And there's there's other aspects to it too with corporate America. But the bottom line is debt has increased to record levels in both private sector and in the government sector as well.
Right.
And this is absolutely unsustainable. The economy has not recovered in any way, shape, or form to a level where it can service this amount of debt. It just simply cannot happen. So we've had basically a house of cards. It's like a Ponzi scheme. You take in money and promise to pay back money based on what you get from even more investors.
Right.
And there comes a day when you can't find any more investors and the gig is up.
Right.
And we cannot support the levels of debt, either as a nation or as just, as people within a nation. Public or private debt is what I really mean to say. It's absolutely unsustainable, and it has to stop. And at this point, nobody's putting on the brakes anywhere, either public or private. And that means that the market will be left to itself to first pop and then implode. That's where we're headed today. That's the big risk today.
Yeah, and I don't hear many people talking about, which I'm surprised. Is it going to creep up on us like it did in 2007? All of a sudden. I know you had mentioned that it affected or will affect retirees. Pension plans, 6 to 8%. It just seems like we're going to be in survival mode soon.
Well, a lot of people are already in survival mode. I hate to say there was a story that I saw just today that food banks across America are seeing record levels of requests. In many areas, lines are forming at 6:30 in the morning to line up for free food.
Wow.
And the food banks are running out of food in many cases, and they're getting desperate. But this is in the face of supposed very low unemployment, and supposedly in a robust economy, as the government would lead you to believe.
You're right. This is what I've been hearing.
This has not happened. The people on the street are still suffering as if they were in the last recession still to this day. So it's not like we've come a great distance since 2009 economically. We have not.
Right.
And even though unemployment is just, the what do you call it, the nominal statistic of 5.3% or whatever it is completely bogus, because there have been millions of people driven out of the labor market altogether who have given up on looking for a job permanently.
Right. Yeah.
And so instead of being a contributing member of society, now they are a detriment to society. They're going on public services, they're going on food stamps,
right,
other forms of assistance, and so on. And so the lie that we hear from the government and from institutional sources, it's just tragic. But the people on the street that are living this life, they have another story. They're telling another story, and statistics are proving that, like the food bank that story.
How come we're not covering this? We don't hear this on the news, Pat. Like, what's going on?
Nobody wants to hear bad news.
Yeah,
and the government doesn't want to give you bad news. The only way that Obama can preserve some kind of legacy for himself, and I think he's really consumed by that too. By the way,
yes, I agree.
He needs to have a legacy that includes economic prosperity. And he didn't do anything, of course, to, over the last several years, other than try and destroy several industries in America. But he hasn't done anything to bring the economy up. But nevertheless, if they can convince everybody that the economy did really well under the Obama administration, well, that's part of his legacy. It's just, meaning it's just a lie.
Yeah.
It's fabricated PR stunt to make every statistic look good when every statistic does not look good.
Right. Well, I remember you mentioned in your article that our liability is currently $59 trillion. Yeah. How do we get that? Yeah, explain that.
Well, there's nothing. Unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about it. It is what it is. Mm-hmm. I'm, very, very disturbed when you look at it from the standpoint of how much is owed by every individual in the country. It's something over $25,000-$30,000 per head. Wow. I don't have the money to pay that off.
Right. Right.
I bet you don't either.
No, absolutely not.
And then you got to figure that includes all the people on food stamps and welfare and the young children who don't have jobs yet and everybody else. Mm-hmm. And if you look at it on a household basis, it's somewhere around $250,000 per person or per household. Wow. And I don't know very many households that can pay that kind of money back.
No, I don't either.
It's just, what kind of job do you have to pay that kind of debt off? Well, it's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. So we're way over our head as a nation, and of course, not everybody has loans, but when you look at it in the aggregate, it's a disaster waiting to happen.
It is. And they keep saying the bubble's getting bigger. So what are we waiting for? Are we waiting for it to explode or pop itself?
It will, and it's happening, I believe, right under our nose right now. I think we've had plenty of evidence that around the world that deflation is taking hold in region after region. It's already quite prominent in Europe. Deflation is beginning to take a huge hold in China right now, which just devalued its currency by a little bit over 5%. It would appear at this stage that a currency war is about to take place, which is very typical of a deflationary depression. Mm-hmm.
And what does that mean, a war?
Well, a currency war is when nations begin to compete with each other according to their currencies, when they cannot compete economically through imports and exports and stuff like that. Right. They compete by jockeying their currencies around, typically devaluing their currency against the rest of the currencies that they trade with. Mm-hmm. The net effect of that, when a currency is devalued against another currency, is that exports of that country become cheaper to the rest of the world. So ostensibly, they would get more business. Mm-hmm. But when you take the gloves off, so to speak, in a currency war like China seems to be doing this at this point, other nations are forced to respond by devaluing their currency against, for instance, China's currency. Mm-hmm. And when you get 5 or 10 nations around the world that all of a sudden start devaluing their currencies, again, you end up with a giant currency crisis throughout the world.
Yeah, I could see that.
And eventually, troops will follow. Mm-hmm. This is what happened in World War II in Europe. It happened back before the Great Depression. And it happened before World War I as well. So the currency war is a very dangerous harbinger of economic turmoil that's coming.
Yeah, and I'd like to do, Pat, is move on to the GDP statistics, only because, we can introduce the audience to it right now. Why don't we explain to our listeners real quick, we have about a minute, what the GDP is and how it relates to our economical situation?
Certainly. It's a very complicated thing, economically speaking, but it stands for gross domestic product. And what it means basically is it defines the size of the economy, the overall size of the economy. If we say the economy is growing, that means GDP is going up. If we say the economy is shrinking, then GDP is going down.
We're going on a break. We'll be right back with Patrick Wood, so please stay tuned.
You're listening to Love for the Truth Radio. We'll be right back, so please stay tuned.
Anxiousness is sin in the New Testament. Clearly, it says, be anxious for nothing. And fear is a sin as well. And we know that the New Testament says that perfect love casts out fear. We also know that Proverbs says that the beginning of wisdom is fear of the Lord. So, yes, we can have fear of the Lord, but beyond that, we're instructed not to have fear of anything. or about it, to be anxious about it. And this is a time in America's life for Christians that you need to figure out, will you really trust the Lord and serve Him or not?
If you just tuned in, I'm Cindy Hartline, your host for the show. Our guest today is Patrick Wood, the chief editor of the August Forecast, which provides info by analyzing trends that relate to markets, economics, politics, and finance. In our first segment, we talked about what happened in 2007 and 2008 and how the crash was just a glimpse of what is yet to come. Pat, let's give our listeners again some knowledge of what's going on so they can be better prepared. Why don't we again explain to them what the gross domestic product means to our economical situation.
That's right. If you ever saw the actual formula that makes up the GDP, if you went to an economics class, you'd get a headache right away.
Yeah,
and if you had to memorize it so you could repeat it back on a test, I don't know what you'd do. You'd really be upset.
Yeah.
I had to do that once upon a time. But all GDP refers to is the size of the economy. Okay. It's a measure of the overall size of an economy. So if somebody says, well, the GDP is growing, that just means the economy is growing. Mm-hmm. Well, if they say, well, the GDP grew by 5%, well, it means basically that the economy overall grew by 5%. Does that mean every little piece of the economy? No, maybe some grew at a faster rate and some grew at a slightly less rate, but on average, we'll say it grew by 5%. So it's really, you don't need to understand any more than that, basically, to have the discussion on whether our economy is in good shape or not.
Right. But
most economists would point to GDP as an indicator of health. If it's going up, that's good. If it's going down, that's bad. Okay,
so are we going up or are we going down?
Well, actually, we're not doing very well, actually. The gross domestic product has grown in the last few years, but it's been very meager. Mm-hmm. Very, very small rate of growth compared, to historic measures. Okay. And especially after a recession. Usually, let's just go back in history, go back 50 years. Every recession that we've had that's basically, knocked the size of the economy backwards or down, has always recovered within, at least 18 months, 24 months. Things are pretty much back on track again and growing at a nice clip, maybe a 4%, 5% per year clip. That's not a great amount, but it's pretty good. Mm-hmm. The economy since 2009, when that recession was more or less declared as ended, it's been limping along anywhere from 1 to 2%. Okay, that's a very, very small recovery. In fact, it's not really a recovery at all. Mm-hmm. So the government is crowing about how things are getting better, but truly, this has been the worst recovery that we've ever had, even since the Great Depression.
So we're not really recovering.
Happening. And so, that's part of the problem when we see debt go up so dramatically, and our total debt in America is getting close to $60 trillion.
That's unbelievable.
It's unbelievable. Yeah. And the size of the economy that we have today cannot support that level of debt.
Right.
It will not be able to pay the interest and the principal back at some point, and there's going to be some alleviation of debt through bankruptcies, through renegotiation of loans and stuff, where somebody's going to lose money on it, and the debt's going to have to be reduced. But it can't be sustained at the level it's going. So the debt has been going up much, much faster than the size of our economy in the last 5-6 years.
Right.
I know. It's dangerous.
Yeah, you mentioned that. What about our stocks? Pat, you had mentioned that they're high with no earnings. I wasn't really quite sure exactly what that meant, but what's going to happen in the stock market? A lot of people say that the stocks are going to end up crashing in the fall. I mean, I don't want to say any predictions or anything like that, but this is what we're hearing on the internet. A lot of people have stocks. They don't know whether they should take them out. Should they keep them, sell them? Should they hold on to them? What's going on with the stock market?
Well, yeah, people. It's hard enough for people that really understand the stock market to make forecasts.
Right.
When people that don't know much about it try to make a forecast, it's really a lost cause. And that's not saying that somebody might be right. Even a broken watch is right twice a day.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, there are lots of reasons to think right now that the stock market, is in extreme jeopardy of a significant decline. And there's a number of reasons that would support that. All given by professionals inside the industry that live this stuff. It's their life. It's their career. They're looking at it and they're saying there's great danger. So this is enough to be concerned right now by somebody looking in, just listening to what the experts have to say about it.
Right.
But when I say the market has gone up in the last 5 years, it's an understatement. The market has been on a tear since 2009. It's exceeded everybody's expectations. And it's been mostly because of the Federal Reserve pumping quantitative easing funds into the economy that was supposed to go and help businesses and people and stuff like that. But basically, the Wall Street crowd got a hold of it, and it went into liquid investments like stocks and bonds. And so the market has been inflated artificially over the last 5 years. And that's very dangerous, because when that artificial stimulation stops or it runs out, what's going to happen to prices? They're going to go down.
Yeah, then where do you go? And you mentioned the real estate. I wanted to move on to that it's not as bad as it was in 2008, but you had mentioned in our last conversation that we're on the edge of another huge deflation.
Well, we are, and it is, when I use the word deflation here in terms of real estate, it means that number one, prices will drop, of course, but deflation really refers more to the level of debt in the system to support these economic activities. The level of debt is way too high. People can't support it, and eventually sectors like real estate, which are very sensitive to debt, will get hit very, very hard, because all of the real estate industry really is based on debt and people's ability to get debt and to pay debt.
Right.
And when they can't pay debt, then real estate prices start going down to a level where they can't.
Yeah. So would this be a good?
Yeah. So the real estate market is in great jeopardy right now, but this is still, it's not an isolated thing. This is in relation to all the other stuff that we're looking at as well.
Yeah. And what's interesting, Pat? I had a person come to my home the other day who was involved in real estate, and I had asked her, how's the market doing? And she said, fantastic. I was surprised. So what are they saying or not? What is it that they don't know about the real estate market being on the edge of another huge deflation? I mean,
well, the real estate business is always going to have transactions. I've had brokers that have explained to me that whether it's high or low, that there will always be business taking place. Right. People would be buying and selling regardless. So a good real estate broker should be able to survive an up market or a down market.
Gotcha. Okay.
But you've got to realize the moral hazard in the real estate market is optimism, and it's it's kind of a confidence game in a way. Who would buy a house from a broker who told the client that it looks like there could be a real significant drop in prices in the next 2 years? Yeah,
right. Yeah, I guess if you look at it that way, right?
Yeah, you'd be one broke real estate agent.
That's right.
Pretty quickly.
Very quickly. All right, so let's look at the bond market. You said it's hugely overpriced. What if bond prices tank? Give us what'll happen in that situation.
This will be going right along with stocks, unfortunately, and yes, because the Fed has kept interest rates very, very low. that means that bond prices have been very high, artificially inflated, kind of like stocks have been. And you realize the rate of interest on a bond is inverse to the price of the bond. So if a $1,000 bond pays, I don't know, say $100, that's 10%. Mm-hmm. But if the price of the bond goes down to $90, still paying $100 interest, well, the interest rate just went up. And if the bond goes to $110, you're still getting $100 interest. Well, the yield went down. So you see, if the yield went to 5%, the bond would have to be priced significantly higher than $1,000.
Right.
So when interest rates are low, bond prices are high. Mm-hmm. And the risk here is that interest rates will climb again and will drop the price of bonds across the board. This has already started to happen in the junk bond market, where prices are going down and rates are going higher. And it's happening around in other parts of the world as well right now, where rates are going up and stuff. And the risk is, of course, to people who invest in bonds, that would include all the pension funds, that would include retirees. You can imagine that they really don't need another beating right now.
That's right. No, that's right.
After the last round in 2007, 2009, this poor crowd does not need to have another financial beating like they had before. But they're at risk right now. They're in serious trouble. And of course, any retiree or anybody planning for retirement that has money set aside for to make income and stuff, you're not supposed to invest that money in stocks. You're supposed to put it into something that's really, really safe.
Yes.
Like either a bank CD or into a treasury bill or some I don't know, General Motors bonds or something. It's really safe. And whatever retirees thought they could get 6, 7, 8 years ago, they're getting about maybe 30% of that amount right now because interest rates are so low. So they've really gotten hosed.
Yeah. So what we're looking at, we seem like we're in deep trouble, Pat. I mean, just listening to you about our stock market situation, even real estate, the bond market is hugely overpriced. The bonds prices are tanking. So what we're saying right now is we're living on the edge. We're just waiting. Would you say that we really shouldn't make any moves right now in any one of those directions?
Well, exactly. It's very risky. I was caught by a phrase in an article that I read this morning by an economist that works for SocGen, and that's a big global banking organization. And the comment that he made is that the global economy is like a ship, a passenger ship floating, going across the ocean with no lifeboats, hoping that it doesn't have a disaster.
You're listening to Love for the Truth Radio. We'll be right back, so please stay tuned.
I think Christians should be excited about Bible prophecy today. I think they should have their nose in the book of Revelation every day if they could, and study these things. And we're not commanded as Christians to look for the return of Antichrist. If that's your attitude, forget it. But we're cautioned and we're encouraged to look for the return of Jesus Christ for His church, period and subject. And this is what we should be looking for. Prophetically speaking, we have more things happening in the world today that just are so exciting that Christians that don't look into these things are just missing such a blessing.
If you just tuned in, our guest today is Patrick Wood, the chief editor of the August Forecast, which provides info by analyzing trends that relate to markets, economics, politics, and finance. Pat, let's take a look at the Economical Global Forecast for a better view. We talked about the GDP, the gross domestic product, in our last segment. I'm learning about that, about our stocks and the bond market, and also about real estate. But I think if we take a worldview now of what's going on globally, I think we can get a better picture of the risks that we're really, what's happening right now economically, and how we shouldn't be taking the risks to preserve things?
Well, the size of our economy is limited in many cases by the level of debt that we or anybody else has around the world. And the reason is that if you have to service a lot of debt by making interest payments, that's money that doesn't go into actual resources like, equipment, building things, hiring people, that sort of thing. Right. So the more debt grows, the more it has a limiting effect on growth. But our country is unfortunately intimately or intricately involved with all the rest of the world. This is thanks to the global elite who have kind of knitted all the countries together. It wasn't a smart thing to do. It hasn't done us any favors for sure. But we're now kind of part of that whole fabric of the global economy. And so when global debt gets out of whack, well, we're right in that mix. I mean, the global debt actually is more exaggerated than our domestic debt is at this point. It's getting close to a level of, oh my goodness, $180 trillion on a global basis.
Wow, $180 trillion.
It's just staggering.
It is staggering.
Somebody did the calculations on that, and they figured that $200 trillion is about $27,000 for every person living on Earth.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
This debt is 300% more than global GDP. In other words, if you take the whole size of the global economy, the debt is worth 3 times more than that.
It's unbelievable.
So what are the chances of getting it paid off? Virtually zero.
No, something's going to have to happen. Something's going to have to change. We know that it is, biblically we know that it is. You were talking about that Greece is a good example of the debt implosion. They were forced to sell key national assets to private parties. Tax revenues dried up. And what can we learn from Greece? Or are we in a position that our hands are tied and that we're heading in a similar direction? There's nothing that we can do about it. Is there anything we can change?
I know. Isn't it ironic that Greece and Rome were the two countries upon which Western civilization is based? And these are the first two countries that seem to be leading the way to economic destruction.
Yeah.
Greece has a lot of reasons to be ashamed of itself, quite honestly. Their overly socialistic government has led the people to believe they can get a free ride forever. They can't. They came up short on that. Their debt got way out of hand, and eventually they couldn't pay it. And they said to the bankers in Europe, "We can't pay our debt." Now, you can say that to some bankers, and maybe they'll be benevolent towards you. But by and large, when you owe somebody money and their life depends on it, and if they don't get it back, they're going to get very ugly real fast.
Yeah.
And Greece found out that the bankers that they own, the people they owe the money to, they got ugly, real ugly. And they have taken Greece literally down to the ground to make an example out of them, if nothing else, to make an example out of them that, don't try this on us. You're going to pay your debt one way or another. And if you don't, we'll crush you.
Wow.
And so Greece said, we're not paying, and so they crushed them. And now all the key Greek assets that really kind of supported the government, things like the real estate, the islands they owned off the coast, the key national industries that they owned, all of those have been forced onto the open market so that they could be purchased up by private parties.
That's a shame, yeah.
So when they're all done, basically Greece is going to end up with owning no assets, and the people will just basically be on the street.
Pat, it just seems...
Very pathetic human tragedy going on right now in Greece.
Yeah, it seems that way. You had mentioned that they had the socialistic views, and it just seems like socialism doesn't work. We were a country that, we lived under capitalism, free will here. And it just seems like whenever we move towards socialism, this is what happens. We can't possibly carry people... their debts and without people working for themselves. Am I right about that? Or
That's right. No,
Yeah,
you're right.
yeah.
You're right. Greece is the perfect example of what happens
Yeah.
In the end when a country disintegrates. It is disintegrating.
Mm-hmm.
The banking system is in shambles. People can't get a hold of cash. Businesses have closed. They're closing at a rate. I think at one time I heard a rate. They were closing at a rate of 100 businesses a day.
Oh, that's a shame.
It just makes you want to cry.
Yeah, it does. And I think if do you think? Well, are we headed in that similar direction?
Well, our financial situation, believe it or not, is actually statistically worse than Greece's.
Well, that doesn't sound too good. Yeah, that doesn't sound good.
So, from just by the numbers, we've got nothing to crow about in America.
Yeah.
It's just that the debt collectors haven't come to collect their money yet. That will happen someday, and sooner or later, the federal government will not be able to support all of its interest payments, and will end up defaulting. It'll be a real ugly period of our history.
Yeah. Hey, what about, Pat? What about the other countries that are going through economical upsets? And how do they affect the U.S.? Why don't we talk briefly? You had mentioned Puerto Rico's death spiral. What's going on there, and how does that affect us?
That's exactly right. Puerto Rico's governor himself said that Puerto Rico was in a death spiral. This is not some term that I coined.
Wow.
But Puerto Rico announced just a few weeks ago they can't pay us debt. And it's defaulted already on a series of bonds. What's going to happen at this point is anybody's guess, but they're basically out of money. And again, like Greece, people are leaving Puerto Rico in droves.
Yeah.
People have money. Do you think they're going to hang around there and wait for that death spiral to catch their money? No way, man. They're jumping ship, coming to the States or going to Europe or wherever and getting their money out as fast as they can. So that just works against the death spiral, you see.
Yeah.
It just makes it happen a little faster.
Yeah, they're taking their money out and running. What about Portugal and Spain? You write about the government bonds, and what is the BBB, by the way?
Well, that's a bond rating.
Okay.
There's global bond rating agencies like Standard & Poor's that determine the efficacy of a nation's debt. And unfortunately, Portugal's debt is a junk bond status now, which is BBB minus. Spain is still at BBB, which is one step above junk status. And the reason they call junk bonds junk is because that's just what they are. There's a high likelihood of bankruptcy sometime in the future. So you're passing a burning match, if you buy these bonds. But they're both countries are in extreme risk right now. Portugal more so than Spain probably, but Italy's in trouble as well. They have a lot of problems to work out. And one country after another, first Greece goes, and then Puerto Rico went. That's the second country within, 6-month period. I expect there will be more, maybe out of the third world, or maybe it could be a Portugal. But there will be more countries that will be defaulting on their the government bonds. And you see, every time they do that, the debt has to get written off. Somebody's just losing money, you see. The debt goes poof. It's gone. Yeah. And the people that the money was owed to, they're just out the money. They just, maybe they'll end up declaring bankruptcy as well.
Yes. You never know. It spirals.
This is how deflation goes. This is how debt deflation takes place. It's just, if a country goes bankrupt, they're going to start taking banks with them and businesses and people, and, it's just one big happy bankruptcy party. Yeah.
And you had mentioned that China's had a 30% crash. They're now selling treasury bills?
Well, they are.
Yeah.
They had been buying treasury bills as an investment, realizing that it was the safest thing to put their money in.
And now they're selling them.
Yeah, I know. And so now they're being forced in a position of actually selling some treasury bills. And the Chinese government is in deep trouble right now. They're making some very bad decisions. Their economy is basically internally is in shambles. The stock market finally got wind of that. It had gone up way too high, too fast, and the rug was pulled out under their stock market. It crashed 30% in 30 days. It's a huge, and that really is a crash.
Yeah, it is.
And I remember one day it was down, I think, 8.5% or 9% in a single day.
That's unbelievable.
That's ugly.
Yeah. So Pat, we're looking at this. We're saying, okay, we're looking at Greece here, Puerto Rico, Portugal, and Spain. China's 30% crash, and it seems like the U.S. dollar seems to be. Even though I remember John Loeffler had said, financial advisor, had said that the U.S. dollar was the best looking house in a poor neighborhood. It may look like the best, but we're teetering on a collapse. And it seems like you said, like all these other countries are networked, we're threaded right into the other nations. Our U.S. dollar is being used. What's going to happen if the U.S. dollar collapse? We have a
well, I don't see it collapsing in the sense that most other doomsayers do.
Okay.
The dollar has been very strong in the last 3 years. It's actually been on a tear. Mm-hmm. And I think it's going to continue. See, the bankers, the New York bankers especially, and other global banks around the world that are able to loan money in dollars, they've been very shrewd about increasing dollar debt throughout the world.
Okay.
And so loans to other countries, loans to businesses outside of the United States have been denominated in U.S. dollars. They have to be paid back in U.S. dollars. Mm-hmm. So you can't just walk in with some other currency and say, "Here, I'm paying off my debts." No, we want dollars.
Right.
So you have to go out and buy dollars. Mm-hmm. If you've done something else with your money, you have to go out and buy dollars and bring it back to pay off your loan. Well, here's an ironic thing. Even in China, where China's built up this huge economic industry over there, here's what's really happened inside of China. Their own banking industry was so corrupt that you had to bribe everybody you had to bribe everybody along the supply chain to get something done. So bribery was the key thing to get loans in China for like 20 years.
That's unbelievable.
Now the Chinese government has cracked down on corruption. It says no more bribes. Guess what happened? The loans stopped. Wow. What they had done, they had gone offshore to borrow dollars from international banks because they couldn't get their own domestic currency. They would take the dollars back to their own banks, switch them they switch them to the yuan. Then they'd go bankrupt, and they'd have to pay the dollars back. They didn't have the money to pay them back.
We're going on a break. We'll be right back again with Patrick Wood to conclude our program. So please stay tuned.
You're listening to Love for the Truth Radio. We'll be right back, so please stay tuned.
Prayer, drawing near to the Lord, and preserving your capital, whatever you had, is a good thing to do as well. But in the end of it, God's promise to you is that He will take care of you. And the Scripture says this for a good reason, that the righteous will not be seen begging bread. And that doesn't mean we may not be hungry, but it does mean that the Lord will take care of those who are His. So you just want to make sure that you really are His in the first place. Test yourself to that and get back to the basics of your faith and go back and realize that our country is not in some kind of a sacrosanct position before God to escape all the troubles that ever happen in the world. The troubles are coming on us, so we might as well prepare for it. That's the best way. If you have resources, if the Lord has blessed you financially, whatever, you will go into capital preservation mode in the next several years. Whatever that means for you, I can't tell you exactly, but hang on to what you have. Don't take risky investments. Don't take risk at all. And just look for ways that you can preserve the capital that you have and hang on to it. And somehow, if we get through it and things do turn up again, well, you'll have something available to start over. Seed corn, if you will, to plant yet another crop in the future maybe and get a harvest off that as well.
Welcome back. I'm Cindy Hartline, your host. Our guest today is Patrick Wood, global expert on the subject of technocracy and author of Technocracy Rising, the Trojan Horse of Global Transformation. What does technocracy have to do with our impending financial collapse? Well, it has everything to do with government control. And that's where I believe we're headed. You know, we talked about in our last segments about the global debt. Greece was a good example of debt implosion. We had other countries. We were talking about Puerto Rico's death spiral, the problems that Portugal and Spain are having, China's 30% crash. and how these other nations are going to affect us as a nation. What I see, this is my opinion, I see a perfect storm for a one world government, and I believe that's where we're headed. We're not going to set any dates here. However, financial advisors and those in the prophetic type ministries, Pat, believe that the U.S. dollar will crash all at once in September. And I know people are listening to this program because that's exactly what they think is going to happen. All over the internet, we see this. Are these false prophets, or is there something that's supposed to happen this fall? And what do you think?
Well, I don't want to call anybody a false prophet on this one, because this is not exactly a biblical issue. But
okay.
I do not believe that the U.S. dollar is going to crash, and that's going to be the problem that brings us down economically.
Okay.
We've already discussed that a little bit earlier in the program. But on the flip side of that, as the U.S. dollar climbs higher, because people will be scrambling to pay off their debts that are denominated in dollars, they have to go out into the marketplace and buy dollars. As supply and demand, the value of the dollar is going to go up relative to other currencies. They still won't be able to pay off their debt, and they still will experience bankruptcies and stuff. And in the end of it, all of the paper currencies in the world are likely to go up in smoke at the same time. So basically, we're just disputing over how are we going to get to the end?
Yes, that's
Will it
right.
be this one or whatever? And in the end of it, it's all going to be pretty ugly. It could be a rollover process that takes several months to happen, or it could be quite dramatic. Mm-hmm. The Chinese market, for instance, crashed 30% in 30 days. That's a very significant crash. If that happened in our stock market, 30% of a market valued at 15,000 would be 4,500 points. That would get, if our market dropped 4,500 points in 30 days, it would get people's attention. Let me tell you.
Well, what would that look like? Why don't you paint a picture of the grim possibilities? Where would that leave us if something like that had happened?
Well, this is kind of like carpet bombing in a way during the Vietnam War, where planes flew over and just dropped bombs indiscriminately, and it just looked like a big fireworks show on the ground. When you get into a situation like this, where it's a real economic financial battlefield, about the only thing you can do is hunker down in the foxhole and just hope that nothing lands right on you directly. So when I say hunker down, it means you're probably not going to be spending much money on anything, whether it be stocks or buying a house or buying additional gold or silver or whatever. From a financial protection point of view, cash is king right now. Cash will continue to be king during a deflationary period. Mm-hmm. And we're headed into deflation right now. Inflation is not the problem. Deflation will be the master problem in the next several years. Cash is king during that kind of a period. And so as far as holding assets are concerned, cash is going to be a very good thing to hold. Mm-hmm. I do believe. And the Greeks would have done well to hold cash before their bank shut down and only gave them $160 a day to take out of their ATMs. You cannot run a business on $160 a day, I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. So people that own restaurants and businesses that employed things, that made things, they couldn't make payroll, they couldn't buy supplies because they couldn't get cash out of the bank. It was a mess. So they just went out of business.
So Pat,
cash is king.
Yeah, so when you say cash is king, okay, we're saying, all right, so now my cash is in a bank, but like you said, what happened to China, they had that 30% crash, and then they couldn't take their monies out of the bank. So where does that leave us if something happens? Should we take some money out of the bank and keep cash in our homes? I mean, is this what
Absolutely you can, and I think many Americans have done that, and they're still doing it, and mm-hmm. the feds don't like you to do that, but to heck with them. It's we have a currency, and that's what it's there for.
Yeah.
And there's no law against doing it.
Right.
If you want to take 20% of your savings account and convert it to cash and keep it under your mattress or in a safe or wherever you choose, you're allowed to do that in America still. Mm-hmm. There are limitations, there are restrictions.
Yeah, I was going to say
you can't go in and ask your bank for $10,000 because they'll start asking questions about money laundering.
Right. We talked about that on one of the other programs. That's why I was wondering, can we even do that if we take $10,000 out? At a time.
Not all at once. So you just don't do it all at once. If you have a policy of accumulating cash, just every time you buy something when you're out at the grocery store or whatever, take $40, $60, or $100 out, cash over. You can do it almost everywhere today that accepts credit cards. Right. It doesn't cost anything extra. Just take a cash over amount and throw it in the till when you get home, and you'd be surprised how fast your little cash fund can build up. Right. But you still can't easily go to a bank and draw, or an ATM and draw out $300 a day, or you can go to the window and get $500 a day and not attract any suspicion whatsoever.
All right. So maybe this is something that we should do. Is there another agenda, Pat? I want to move over to Technocracy because you are the author of the book Technocracy, Rising the Trojan Horse of Global Transformation. And you said that it has a lot to do with our economy, or not economy, but economical situation. Why don't you explain that to us, Pat?
Well, I will.
How do they connect?
Technocracy is a replacement economic system that was originally designed way back in the 1930s during the heat of the Great Depression. It was designed by scientists and engineers to replace capitalism altogether. They believed capitalism was dead back in the Great Depression. By 1932 and 1933, they were certain of it. Everybody typically hated politicians back in those days. They believed the politicians had mismanaged the technology in society, and that the world came crashing down because of inept politicians. Well, they could have been right to an extent. We're not doing too well with politicians today either, are we?
No, no, we're not.
But there was a lot of angst towards politicians. But as a replacement economic system, this technocracy model has been resuscitated by the global elite, and particularly now by the United Nations. They call it the green economy, but it's just warmed over technocracy from the 1930s. And it intends to do away with a price-based economic system altogether, and instead have a resource-based economy that would be priced in terms of energy. I can't go into it in a few minutes, but that you hear about cap and trade, you hear about carbon tax, stuff like that. Yeah. This is all symptoms of technocracy. And there's two economic systems today that are duking it out in the international space for supremacy. There's capitalism on one hand, and there's technocracy on the other side. And they're having a battle to the death. We don't know how many rounds they're going to go, but one of them's going to die and one of them's going to live. And right now it seems like technocracy seems to be, it has the upper hand. So, you can learn about this stuff by going to the United Nations and just looking up green economy or looking up climate change. In fact, the head of climate change at the UN, a lady by the name of Christiana Figueres, she is the most important leader on climate change at the United Nations. She said in a press release earlier this year, and this is a direct quote, "This is the first time in the history of mankind, that we're setting ourselves the task of intentionally, within a defined period of time, to change the economic development model that has been reigning for at least 150 years since the Industrial Revolution," close quote. Wow. You don't need to read between the lines on this. They're talking about replacing capitalism altogether, and that's one of the reasons that capitalism has had such a hard time of recovery in the last 6 years, is these idiots are fighting against it, try and impose their system of technocracy. And that's why I wrote my book, Technocracy Rising. It is an economic book. It's not a political book necessarily, but technocracy is an economic system designed to kill off capitalism and replace it altogether.
So where can our audience get your book? How can they get a copy?
Is my website, technocracyrising.com, just like the title of the book. It is available, however, on Amazon, and there's a Kindle version on Amazon if you like to read on a reader. But either place, Amazon.com or technocracyrising.com.
And Pat, I guess the big question is most of our audience are believers, Christians that are that heed warnings. They want to know what's going on. They have the listening ears. Why should they be interested in what we're talking about right now? The collapse of the U.S. dollar, how it will affect the entire world. What about technocracy? Why should Christians know this information?
Well, there's a huge prophetic implication to the whole topic of technocracy and what's going on in the world today. Most Christians are missing this. I realize that, but I'd like to see that change. I think Christians should be excited about Bible prophecy today. I think they should have their nose in the book of Revelation every day if they could, and study these things. And we're not commanded as Christians to look for the return of Antichrist. If that's your attitude, forget it. But we're cautioned and we're encouraged to look for the return of Jesus Christ for His church, period and subject. And this is what we should be looking for.
Yeah.
Prophetically speaking, we have more things happening in the world today that just are so exciting that Christians that don't look into these things are just missing such a blessing.
Yeah. So you would say, Pat, that, everything that we're talking about, people can be fearful, like, oh, no, what are we going to do? What if I lose my job? What if I lose my money? What if I lose my stocks? What we're saying here is that that's not our hope anyway. Our hope is not in this world. We're in the world. We're not of the world. And basically our eyes should look towards our blessed hope, which is the return of Jesus Christ. And that's our hope, and we need to get ready. You would say that too, right, Pat? We need to get ready. We need to maybe perhaps not embrace the world as much as we have, especially in America. We're very prosperous. We've lived a prosperous life, compared to other nations, and especially third world countries. But it just seems like that it's time for us now to not behold the prosperity that we've had, and maybe to let go. And maybe this is a time where the Lord's trying to teach us that, is to let go.
I think that's a big message. And anxiousness is sin. In the New Testament, clearly it says, be anxious for nothing.
Yeah.
And fear is a sin as well. And we know that the New Testament says that perfect love casts out fear. We also know that Proverbs says the beginning of wisdom is fear of the Lord.
Yeah, that's right.
So yes, we can have fear of the Lord, but beyond that, we're instructed not to have fear over anything.
Right.
Or about anything. You want to be anxious about it. And this is a time in America's life for Christians that you need to figure out, will you really trust the Lord and serve Him or not?
That's right.
Are you going to defect into the postmodern or post-postmodern world, as it's being called now, and trying to do Christian things, appear to be Christian on the outside, but on the inside, you don't want to really do anything for the Lord? This is a time of decision.
We're going on a break. Thank you, Pat, for such a wonderful discussion. We'll tell you how you can contact Patrick Wood when we get back. I want to personally thank you for listening to Love for the Truth Radio. Please visit our website at www.loveforthetruthradio.com. That's www.loveforthetruthradio.com. Well, welcome back. We've had a wonderful conversation with Patrick Wood, global expert on the subject of technocracy and author of Technocracy Rising, the Trojan Horse of Global Transformation. We've been talking about what technocracy has to do with our impending financial collapse, especially worldly. It has everything to do with government control, and we know that eventually that's where we're headed. But we've been talking about how we need to embrace the Lord and not look towards the things of this world and wait for a blessed hope. Pat, it's been wonderful. Thank you for your wealth of information. I know I've learned a lot on the show today. It was hard for me to engage a little bit because it's not a topic that I'm used to, but I did learn a lot, and I'm hoping that our audience did too. Why don't you give the audience a little bit of advice as to what to do, number one, and then two, your contact information and how they can get in touch with you. Well,
certainly. As you said, prayer, drawing near to the Lord, and preserving your capital, whatever you had, is a good thing to do as well. But in the end of it, God's promise to you is that He will take care of you, and the Scripture says this for a good reason, that the righteous will not be seen begging bread. And that doesn't mean we may not be hungry, but it does mean that the Lord will take care of those who are His. So you just want to make sure that you really are His in the first place. Test yourself to that, and get back to the basics of your faith, and go back and realize that our country is not in some kind of a sacrosanct position before God, to escape all the troubles that ever happen in the world. And troubles are coming on us, so we might as well prepare for it. That's the best way. If you have resources, if the Lord has blessed you financially, whatever, you will go into capital preservation mode in the next several years. Whatever that means for you, I can't tell you exactly, but hang on to what you have. Don't take risky investments. Don't take risk at all. And just look for ways that you can preserve the capital that you have and hang on to it. And somehow, if we get through it and things do turn up again, well, you'll have something available to start over. Seed corn, if you will, to plant yet another crop in the future maybe and get a harvest off that as well. People can buy my book, as I said, at Amazon.com. There's a Kindle version there as well. Or they can go to TechnocracyRising.com. And I'd love to send them a book and autograph it for them. And, it's about the same price either way. And people may also be interested in my economic blog site, which is AugustForecast.com. And if you're interested in those sorts of things, you'll find a little bit more information there on August Forecast. But I guess I want to say, the main thing is be looking up. Don't worry about the return of Antichrist. Worry about the return of the Lord.
Amen.
That's what is important for Christians to understand. And in the meantime, you have a wonderful prophetical panorama playing out right in